Chairman Maloney, Ranking Member Fischbach, members of the subcommittee, and congressional staffers who work so hard. Thank you for inviting me to testify at this hearing. I applaud the work of this subcommittee, and I appreciate you all taking the time to provide a forum for the blockchain industry. The blockchain industry has grown over the past decade from a small group of uncommercialized volunteer developers, and it was very small, believe me, to a trillion-dollar global economy encapsulating sophisticated engineering, scientific research, publicly traded companies, and millions of users. While our remarkable growth yields significant opportunities ranging from infrastructure security to entirely new economies like metaverses and NFTs, it also has presented new challenges and amplified the existing problems. Our legacy systems cannot handle the rapid movement of value without counterparty risk and require centralized middlemen. Our regulatory tools, risk management systems, and oversight processes were never designed for such speed, scale, and rapid evolution. For example, in just 4 years, our industry has touched concepts ranging from IPOs to intellectual property to completely new business structures called DAOs that are effectively leaderless and jurisdiction-free. Reflecting upon the 20th century, the dominance of the United States has rested upon 3 pillars: our financial services, our technology companies, and our manufacturing capabilities. These industries are rapidly transforming under the demands of globalization, increased competition, new technologies, and our desire to define ESG rules to ensure a sustainable, values-driven global economy. At our core, our industry's technology is about creating distributed ledgers to store information that needs to be transparent, auditable, time-stamped, and immutable. This process enables records of social and economic concerns to be reliable and programmable. For example, as a rancher, I have to deal with water rights, grazing leases, BLM land, and numerous other agreements, contracts, and economic events. Many of these are not digitized, nor are they shared in ways to provide emergent value to policymakers, regulators, and researchers. The consequences of this fragmentation and lack of digitization are a large amount of inefficiency, replication of work, and a lack of access for entrepreneurs and innovators who could build new products and services that would dramatically reduce costs and improve efficiency for all stakeholders. The power of blockchain technology is its universality and permissionless model for innovation. Our company, Input-Output, has never had to pay a royalty, file a patent application, or acquire a license to pursue business in countries as diverse as Ethiopia to Mongolia. Thus, we have to understand that categories-based regulation that is segregated to the borders of a particular jurisdiction and relies upon centralized actors for reporting and disclosure is unlikely to be effective and, frankly, will inhibit regulation. Furthermore, the Internet's governance, evolution, and innovation aren't controlled by the ITU or some other transnational body, but rather by thousands of interconnected and interdependent agencies and private companies working towards the self-emerging common goals of increased connectivity, capacity, and utility. If we are to discuss how to regulate our industry, protect consumers, and align growth with the realities of modern society, then we ought to have the humility to admit innovation makes specifics difficult. We should focus on principles instead. Blockchains enable the liquidity of value, thought, and commerce at a scale and speed society has never enjoyed before. Instead of predicting the outcome of these new capabilities, we ought to decide on what risks we must guard against, what fundamental rights consumers should have, and how to use new tools for the greatest possible good. It seems prudent to focus on concepts like measuring decentralization, information asymmetries, accessibility of data, and access rather than arguing about jurisdictional bodies or asset categorization. Cryptocurrencies are financial stem cells at their core. They can be nearly any asset and can change over time. Principles don't change. For example, the notion of measuring consolidation and its risks has been an endeavor the United States has pursued and is frankly good at since the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. While none of us are personally familiar with life in the 1890s, we'd certainly be comfortable with the intent and concepts behind the Sherman Antitrust Act. Centralization of markets and power seldom leads to good outcomes. I hope we can engage in a fruitful and ongoing dialogue throughout the coming months as the United States debates the regulatory future of the American blockchain and cryptocurrency industry. Like the prior Congresses in the 1990s discussing the regulatory framework for the Internet that led to the rise of trillion-dollar companies, I believe this Congress can achieve great results by working with our industry in a principles-based legislative approach and leveraging our capabilities to innovate and adapt. Thank you all for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Charles Hoskinson, founder of Cardano cryptocurrency, made an impassioned and informative plea to U.S. Congress. This is educational, this is informative. He was actually one of a few cryptocurrency experts to go before U.S. Congress and help them understand how important positive regulations are for crypto, just like positive regulations for the internet back in the day. This gives me hope for the future of cryptocurrency in America. Welcome back, everybody, to Altcoin Daily. You subscribe for daily content on the entire cryptocurrency market. Congress just got a huge education today on cryptocurrency and the appropriate way to regulate it. 2 more clips, best clip at the end. First of all, Charles, how do you determine which of the 20,000 cryptos should be regulated?
I'm interested in any comments that any of you may have on, of the 20,000 cryptos, how you determine who should be regulated.
Well, one of the powers of our industry is the fact that regulation can become algorithmic. So you don't have to think, well, which person's going to sit down and look at this big pile? Think of the IRS and tax returns. We could quadruple the size of the IRS. We still couldn't audit every single American. It's just not possible. And so what you have to do is say, what tools do we have at our capability? And what's magical about cryptocurrencies is that in the transactions themselves, they can carry metadata, they can carry identity. Rule makers and policymakers can take a step back and say, well, these are the things that we care about, and we can make sure inside the systems that those things don't settle and clear until those things are present. So it's really more of a conversation of what do you care about? And then what we can do as technologists is create a self-certification system. And then what can happen is when there are anomalies or special cases, which often would be rare, then the CFTC or another regulatory body could look through and say, well, let's investigate that. That's generally how we do law enforcement in the nation. We don't break into everybody's house. We wait until we get a warrant, and you have to have some cause for it. So there needs to be some social infrastructure for that.
So self-certification is different than an agency regulating.
Well, they're interconnected. So you have SROs, you have market standards, you have principles, and in many cases, financial regulation is mostly done by SROs or private organizations. If you look at, for example, compliance, it's not the SEC or the CFTC going out there doing KYC and AML. It's banks that are doing these types of things. So it's a public-private partnership, and what needs to be done is to establish those boundaries, and then what we can do as innovators is write software to help make that happen. And literally that's what Chainalysis is doing right now and their competitors.
Solid answer to a complex question. I like that Charles takes the time to do this. He isn't just helping out Cardano, he's helping out the entire cryptocurrency industry. And now for my favorite clip. Charles Hoskinson not only educates, but he charms the hell out of U.S. Congress, all while helping them understand how to properly regulate crypto. We'll finish with this clip. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, Altcoin Daily. We keep you updated on the entire cryptocurrency market on a daily basis. Join our team. And now listen to Charles charm the hell out of U.S. Congress.
Mr. Hoskinson, did I say that? I'm trying.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And I know we just have a few seconds left, but there's a lot of discussion about whether we should regulate certain cryptocurrency as commodities or securities. What do you think might the benefits, and maybe you could talk just a little bit about that. What are the drawbacks, things like that?
Well, with 37 seconds.
No, I'm sorry, yeah.
No, the gentleman can take as much time as he requires.
Oh, thank you, Mr.
Well,
Chair.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I mean, don't push it, but
It's a fine line here.
You got to be careful. I'm Italian. When you look at cryptocurrencies in general, I've always viewed them like financial stem cells. They're kind of more fundamental than a particular category, like a currency or a commodity. And really, it depends on the markets they're traded on and the use and utility that they have. But at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, what public policy considerations are you attempting to satisfy? Is it sanctions compliance? Is it consumer protection? Is it market stability? What we do as an industry is we're all about transparency. So it's kind of funny we're talking and debating about disclosure regimes. There's no other financial asset in the world that really is as transparent as a cryptocurrency. Every transaction from the very beginning for Bitcoin, for example, from January 3rd, 2009 is known. Every single one. The holdings of the founder are known because all of these things are publicly available to everybody. So it's more about, in my view, understandability and the tooling required to make this work on a global basis. So I don't think it would be wise to say, well, is it a security or a commodity, or fall into this temptation of who's the more permissive regulator or what is the regulatory arbitrage, but rather just take a step back and say, what things do we want to guard against? And we now have 13 years of history as an industry of, I think, 6 or 7 collapses, a whole bunch of interesting new things like NFTs that have always pushed the limit, and a global marketplace with more than 100 million people floating around that we can draw from, and we can look on a case-by-case basis and build a framework that makes sense. What's encouraging to me as an entrepreneur, briefly, is that there's a lot of great legislation that's been proposed recently, like the DCA, the FIA. There's executive orders that have come through that are trying to force clarity amongst the executive branch. So these things together create a global dialogue, and if we're clever about it, I think we can converge to a reasonable compromise that we as an industry can live with and continue to be competitive with.